Sometimes, not so much anymore, but sometimes I get accused of lacking an honor code, or I used to get accused of lacking an honor code by people who claim they don't. I feel compelled to represent a sort of three-dimensional viewpoint about what motivates me to create this talk. I assume it was Peter Gabriel and Robert Fripp whose great license in avant-garde arts brought me the attention of so many people that I am now the attention of. Then there's a split screen because I knew only that I wanted to cultivate my poetry and my understanding and abilities in music. I'm deaf now, but there's a tape of my playing if you want to appraise whether I was approaching the right people or would have a reasonable belief that I was approaching the right people. Because there's sort of an affinity between my sensibilities in music and theirs, which isn't unusual. It's not like I didn't accept their verdict about not wanting me in their band. But there were things going on that they didn't tell me. And there was this presumption that I could have comprehended these things. And it came from the script that was planted on me in the rocker panels, so to speak, of the French Connection, in which I played this role that was international. And so you have this existential crime with this person who's been turned upside down as a cockroach by Camus. And they, of course, wanted it understood that I had no honor code, so they get to do this to me. Let's look at what I thought of as an honor code. I didn't formulate the thought because my head was very gummed up with abuse and battery and deafness. Nobody counseled me on deafness. Nobody treated me as a deaf child. From a psychological point of view, I wasn't put in the Western Pennsylvania School for the Deaf. But I was deaf, and everybody knew I was deaf. I was younger than the draft age of the Vietnam War. The war was more or less over when I was 12 years old. But from the time I was about 6 or 7, I knew that Lyndon Johnson was a paranoid type and that the war machine was incredibly hostile to reason. And the people who I admired, looked up to, my mother particularly, was opposed to the Vietnam War. So in those circumstances, it's reasonable that I would form a sort of honor code from listening to people like Joan Baez, who I saw in Point State Park when I was about 8 years old after her husband David was arrested. When steel workers spat on my sister walking under the bridge with the Peace March. She was only 11. At that time, I formulated something of an honor code. not to entertain Ronald Reagan, for example. I loved JFK. It was deeply formative. I remember being 3 years old and having the shock of losing him. My mother says it changed me. I'm not surprised. I'm pretty sure it did too. It deeply registered on me. And when the warplanes began and napalm started falling, I would hide under a table. I was 5 or 6 years old. Frightened. I knew that I was not yet ready to fight in a war when I was about 8 years old and read Worth Fighting For. But I also knew the call of valor of adults who I looked up to when I saw the Battle of Britain, which I read. It was the first book I ever read cover to cover was the Battle of Britain. Because the movie, my father took me to it. Must have been 10 or younger. Saw Where Eagles Dare. Some honky over on Marlborough Road said my shoulders were hunched. Implying I was a slouch. And in East Liberty, one by one, they lined up to beat me up. Now, what would I think? Slaughtering head blows. I mean, fusillades. 6 or 7 blows to the head by people who were older than me. Time after time after time after time. Leaving me with Parkinson's in later life. Leaving me neurologically impaired and deaf and traumatized. Meanwhile, I was getting these upper crust love letters from an Israeli girl who I'm supposed to trust. Never distrust the Israelis, I was told. The people who thought it was a practical joke all went along with it. All the people that Fripp and Eno, like Vladimir Putin and them, got together with and said, let's give him a Trump Milanese haughty and make him believe she loves him. And then detonate the neuroplasm, throw in his face that Yoko Ono wants revenge about Lenin, and she represents the arsonists who have long threatened to light him on fire. They're calling the Caligulas of one night stand blackmail. Because consensual sex in Seattle and Pittsburgh is thought of as a union loan. They don't tell you that. But in this world of make pretend that Hollywood created called double fantasy, that's what they do. It's all mystical. You know, the image on the screen isn't the real James. And we are going to invent a Buzziana hookah jom to suck out the poison of his bad faith and make him thank Jesus that they haven't crucified him, and so on. And this is their practical joke. And they had it all constructed. And it traces back to Mussolini and D.W. Griffith. But they say it didn't happen that way. It just falls into place that way. It was actually found art. We didn't know it was there. We came across it and said, looky at all of these coincidences. She must have been psychic. She must have been psychic. So they start playing psychic ball. And they are determined to justify what they did, with, like castrating me over a virgin. Not a very nice thing to do, not very representative of reason. And they want to reform the schools by burning books. I have a much better idea. Why don't you explain to students that you're uncontrollably psychotic and that if they have sex with anybody out of wedlock, the government will kill them? We have a big 12 down by the municipal building, which stands for the working permit that was given to the 12-year-old girl who seduced me when I had just turned 13 in circumstances of hostage and trauma. A sort of Seven Beauties secret movie from Access Hollywood. Peep. And to Michael Johnson, the abortion clinic is no different from the rubble of Gaza. So they take all these innocent people hostage unless we swear we will never copulate out of wedlock or allow abortions. And Biden says amen, right? In secret. Like he doesn't mind signing the legislation that keeps him in power, but he's going to teach by the burnt hand a thing or two. If that's not true, how did it get so confused? Put on your spinner beanie. By not discussing it openly. Was that so hard? They talk about these things and they say it's in code. You can infer. We implied this, we implied that. That's good enough. And they neglect clean water. They neglect sustainable development goals. They neglect to tell people that we're in a climate catastrophe. They neglect to negotiate in good faith with our so-called adversaries. They smear them with inane little childish things like axis of evil. Nah, nah. The maturity level is zero. Somebody tells me that a senator or two actually emit the idea of dropping a nuclear bomb on unarmed people. Because they refuse to discuss abortion, or because they want to discuss abortion, and because they too are opposed to abortion. It doesn't make any sense. The whole thing gets really confused in their minds because they've cut this condominium turf scene with swimming pools and access that allows them to say, we are determined that anybody who tries to be included in the aspirations of the world for equality and justice and dignity has to pass through our honored traditions of bigotry. And they just happened to keep these people in cages. They just happened to traumatize growing children. And now they're shooting them in the head. One girl, 5 years old, was shot in the head while she was being held by her mother. And some of these cornballs want to drop a nuclear bomb on defenseless people, a tent city. That's not very special. Now, when it comes to Russia, I don't know how much of a role they played in Galveston. Looks like they might have been in on it for convenience. I don't know. Don't expect me to say anything but that I don't know. My goal has always been to look into it, to try to find out. I don't own arms, I just ask questions. Try to get answers occasionally. So. But I do know these same hot dogs who are mouthing off about mentally deranged ideas towards tent cities were also the clowniacs in charge, calling Russia even more menacing after they took down the Berlin Wall, which is what we asked them to do forever, and yielded all kinds of territory and just said, please just don't push. Work with us, cooperate. What's so hard about that? Supposedly you guys are the good guys, so you must be better at it than we are, right? It did not look insincere to me. So I can see why they're angry and afraid and upset. Why wouldn't they be? They were up against Germany, who's doing the stuff that Netanyahu is doing. And supposedly America brought the world to its senses with England defeating Germany. Even we supposedly even brought Germany to their senses and Japan to their senses. And look at us now. It's like Monty Python version of the Third Reich in Congress. My advice for AOC is to call a session of Congress and ask Mike Johnson, are you bombing Gaza because of abortion, Mr. Johnson? Is that your monster from the id on the Phantom Planet? Is that your conjuring? Do you secretly believe you're in a war with the devil or green men from outer space? Would you be willing to discuss it? Call a ceasefire in return for abortion restrictions. Stop bombing children in Gaza in return for abortion restrictions. Not to tell anybody how to vote if such a legislation comes up, but to be honest about it so that people can see what they're dealing with. Is that what we're dealing with? Now, I have often asked, where's all this pussy that they keep saying I've been getting? We know that they were talking about subjecting me to successive degradations of the X motive. I've been alone for 35 years. I certainly never took advantage of Jeannie. She was very pretty. What gives? That you're playing this game with James Curry. You can't even stop it. You know that I would like to be left alone. I put my research online because God forbid I be accused of withholding what I saw or demanding a bribe to divulge. I do think I should be paid for my injuries in work, as any normal person is. But anybody who knows me realizes that I really prefer to just be, I would like to be better accommodated and have assisted care. But I value most of all my privacy with my books. I like my poetry. I want Gaza rescued. And I want the demonic weirdness cut down. Cut down. Oh, stop it. Tone it down. Little bit of quiet from the rumblings of the um, mental cases in Caligula, Christian, Pennsylvania. A little bit quieter Nazism of weird ideas. And direct address of the idea that they can issue working papers to pornography starlets to poach little boys. That's a strange thing to be doing. And it's not defensible under the rubes of a provincial norm, as Pitt often has tried to present it. Public education addresses issues. Democratic Congress addresses issues. We don't start playing masterpiece theater with peculiar notions from the devious ideas of extreme right-wing religions, making sci-fi movies, and then call it an honor code for good conduct when they start giving marching orders to the Knights of Resignation. And they call this a world of ash in their poetry. That's not responsible. Don't have Pope Carl come and say Martha Gellhorn clemenced his world of ash thesis when she was skeptical of my fear of Ronald Reagan, because that is not true, however skeptical you may be. Martha Gellhorn absolutely loathed the idea of a human government authoring an apocalypse. It preyed on her mind. She hated the idea. She called them insane pygmies, these people with their poems titled World of Ash. She called them insane pygmies.